The chase begins. The desert stretched endlessly in all directions, its golden sands shimmering under the scorching twin suns. The heat waves danced over the dunes, making everything blur like a cruel mirage. Commander Eric Solis ran across the burning ground, his breath coming in short, sharp gasps. His legs ached, his throat was dry, and sweat dripped into his eyes. But he couldn't stop. Stopping meant death. Behind him, the sound of metallic engines roared. The hunters were close. Their hovering machines sliced through the air, kicking up dust as they closed in. Eric glanced over his shoulder and saw 3 of them, black, insect-like war drones with glowing red sensors scanning for movement. They were fast, ruthless, and programmed to kill. He had to keep running. A desperate mission. 20 days. That was how long he had to reach the capital city and deliver the Queen's message. He was the last surviving messenger. His ship had been shot down the moment he entered enemy territory. His entire unit had been wiped out. Now he was alone. He clutched the small metallic message device strapped to his chest. The words inside it could change the fate of humanity. The Queen had entrusted him with this mission, and he would not fail. But the enemy knew about the message. They wanted him dead before he could deliver it. A deadly trap. Eric spotted a narrow canyon up ahead, its jagged rock formations offering a chance to lose his pursuers. With one final burst of speed, he sprinted towards it. The desert wind howled around him as he slipped between the towering stone walls. Shadows swallowed him whole, offering a brief escape from the burning sun. But the hunters were smart. They didn't rush in blindly. Instead, they split up. One drone circled above the canyon's entrance while the others hovered along the edges, scanning for movement. Eric pressed himself against the cool rock, trying to control his breathing. His suit's energy levels were low. His camouflage shield wouldn't last much longer. If they found him now, it was over. Then, a sharp beeping sound echoed through the canyon. His heart stopped. A tiny red dot appeared on his arm. A tracking laser. Before he could move, the drone fired. A plasma bolt exploded inches from his head, sending rock shards flying. Eric dived to the ground, rolling behind a large boulder as another blast struck where he had just stood. The hunters had found him, and they weren't going to stop. A last-minute escape. Eric's mind raced. He needed a distraction. He reached into his survival kit and pulled out a sonic grenade, a small device no bigger than his palm. He twisted the top and tossed it into the canyon's far end. 3 seconds later, the grenade detonated with a piercing, high-pitched shriek. The sound waves rattled the canyon walls, sending echoes bouncing in all directions. The drones hesitated, their sensors struggling to pinpoint his exact location. Eric didn't waste a second. He ran. He sprinted along the canyon's edge, using the dust cloud from the explosion as cover. The rocky ground was uneven, making every step dangerous. But he pushed forward. One wrong step could mean falling into the deep ravine below. Behind him, the hunters realized the trick. Their red eyes flashed, locking onto him again. Eric reached the canyon's exit and leaped over a fallen rock. His boots hit the sand, and he stumbled forward, barely keeping his balance. He was back in the open desert. But now he had a plan. The old ruins. In the distance, half buried under the sand, Eric spotted ancient alien ruins, the remains of a long-lost civilization. Tall, curved structures jutted from the ground like the bones of a forgotten beast. If he could reach them, he could hide. The hunters wouldn't dare enter a place filled with unknown alien energy. The hunt continues. Eric pushed his tired body forward. His lungs burned, his vision blurred. But he didn't stop. The hunters chased after him, their engines screeching against the silent desert. As Eric reached the first ruin, he ducked inside, vanishing into the shadows. Outside, the war drones hovered, scanning for movement. They wouldn't give up. And Eric knew this was only the beginning. The message's secret. The ruins were ancient, their massive stone walls worn smooth by centuries of relentless desert winds. Eric Solis crouched behind a cracked pillar, his chest rising and falling with each desperate breath. His muscles ached from the long chase, but he couldn't stop now. The hunters were still out there, searching. Outside, the war drones hovered in silence, their red scanning beams sweeping across the sand. One of them moved closer, its metallic body reflecting the last rays of the setting suns. Eric held his breath as the light passed over his hiding spot. If they detected even the faintest movement, he'd be dead in seconds. The message device strapped to his chest felt heavier than ever. It wasn't just a simple transmission. It was the key to something far bigger than he had imagined. If the enemy was willing to hunt him for 20 days across the desert, it meant that whatever the Queen's message contained, it was a threat to their entire empire. Eric had to know why. A hidden chamber. As the last war drone drifted away, Eric scanned the ruins for a safer hiding place. The structure he was inside looked like an old temple, its walls covered in alien carvings, strange symbols that seemed to pulse faintly in the fading light. Then he noticed something, a small opening near the base of the wall, half buried under the sand. He wiped the sweat from his brow and moved toward it carefully. If this led to an underground chamber, he might be able to wait out the night before moving again. Eric dug his hands into the sand, clearing the entrance. The space was just large enough for him to crawl through. With one last glance at the sky, he slid inside, disappearing into the darkness. The passage was narrow, the walls damp and cool against his skin. As he moved forward, the air became thicker, filled with the scent of something old and powerful. His fingers brushed against smooth metal, different from the rough stone of the ruins. Then suddenly, the tunnel opened into a massive underground chamber. Eric froze. This place was not natural. The machine beneath the sand. The chamber was vast, its ceiling stretching high above him. Dim blue lights flickered along the walls, casting eerie shadows over the towering machines that lined the space. They were alien constructs, their surfaces covered in the same strange symbols he had seen above. At the center of the room stood a circular console, its screen flashing with unreadable text. Eric stepped closer, running his fingers over the dusty surface. This place had been abandoned for a long time, but the technology inside was still active. His heart pounded as he placed his hand on the console. The screen flickered, then displayed a holographic map of the galaxy. Eric's eyes widened. It wasn't just any map. It was a record of every major battle, every invasion, every secret alliance between the warring factions. This place wasn't a ruin. It was a hidden archive, buried beneath the desert to conceal the truth about the war. The Queen's message wasn't just a peace treaty. It was connected to this place, this knowledge, and the war itself. Eric reached for the message device, his fingers trembling. He needed to find out exactly what he was carrying. He pressed a button on the device. A holographic projection emerged, displaying the words "classified." For the Queen's eyes only. Before he could react, the chamber shook violently. Something, or someone, had activated the ruins. An unseen enemy. Deep mechanical hum echoed through the chamber. The machines along the walls lit up, their dormant systems coming back to life. Eric backed away, his instincts screaming that he was no longer alone. Then he heard it, a low growl, followed by the sound of metal scraping against stone. He turned sharply, his hand reaching for his weapon. In the shadows beyond the flickering lights, something moved. A figure stepped forward, its form tall, armored, and inhuman. Its eyes glowed a cold blue, and its voice, when it spoke, was like grinding steel. "You are not meant to be here, human." Eric's grip tightened on his blaster. The hunters had found him. But this one was different. It was not just a drone. It was something far more dangerous. Something that wanted the message even more than the enemy did. The race against time. The figure lunged. Eric fired first, his plasma bolt striking the armored chest of the attacker. The impact sent the enemy stumbling backward, but it did not fall. Instead, It absorbed the energy, its body glowing with the stolen power. "That's not good," Eric muttered under his breath. The machine's arm morphed, transforming into a sharp, curved blade. Eric barely had time to move as it slashed through the air, cutting deep into the stone wall behind him. He was outmatched. With no other choice, he turned and ran, sprinting back toward the passage he had come from. The chamber trembled as more machines activated, their eyes blinking to life one by one. If he didn't get out now, he wouldn't get out at all. The hunter becomes the hunted. Eric dove through the tunnel, crawling as fast as he could. Behind him, the metallic monster followed, its movements smooth and relentless. It did not tire. It did not hesitate. He reached the surface just as the war drones outside returned, their sensors locking onto his location. Now he had two enemies, the ones from above and the one below. No more hiding. No more running. Eric pulled out his emergency beacon and activated it. A red light blinked 3 times before sending a distress signal to the Queen's forces. Help was coming, but so was death. He had hours at most before the full weight of the enemy arrived. If he wanted to survive, he needed a new plan. And fast. An unlikely ally. The war drones circled above, their searchlights sweeping across the ancient ruins. Below the surface, the metallic hunter was clawing its way up through the tunnel, its cold blue eyes locked onto Eric. He had no time, no way to escape in both directions. His fingers flew to his wrist device, scanning for any possible route out of this death trap. The ruins stretched for miles beneath the sand, filled with unknown corridors and forgotten passageways. But there was one place that stood out on the map, a sealed chamber deeper underground. A risk, but better than dying here. With a deep breath, Eric turned and ran toward the ruin's inner sanctum, ignoring the pain in his body. Behind him, the hunter leaped from the tunnel, landing with a metallic crash. Its glowing eyes pierced the dust, scanning his every movement. Then it charged. The desperate descent. Eric sprinted through the ruins, dodging fallen pillars and broken walls. His pulse pounded in his ears as he reached a massive door, half buried in sand. The symbols on the door pulsed faintly, as if alive. He reached out, pressing his palm against the cold metal. A low hum vibrated through his bones, and suddenly, the door slid open with a deep, grinding sound. He barely had time to react before the hunter pounced. Eric threw himself forward, rolling through the entrance as the metal beast's razor-sharp claws slashed inches from his back. He hit the ground hard, pain shooting through his ribs. Behind him, the hunter snarled, its blade arm clanging against the edge of the door. But then, something unexpected happened. The symbols on the walls flared to life, and an unseen force slammed the door shut. The hunter was locked out. For the first time since his chase began, Eric took a deep breath. But his relief didn't last long, because he wasn't alone in the chamber. The shadow in the dark. A faint scraping sound echoed through the chamber, followed by slow, deliberate footsteps. Eric pushed himself up, his blaster aimed at the darkness ahead. Then, from the shadows, something moved. A tall, armored figure stepped into the dim light, its body covered in battle-worn plating. Unlike the hunter, this one was different, less machine, more creature. Its dark, scaled skin peeked through the gaps in its armor, and its golden eyes studied Eric with a mix of caution and curiosity. Then it spoke. "You are either very brave or very foolish, human." Eric didn't lower his weapon. "Who the hell are you?" The alien warrior tilted its head. "I am Kareth, and you, messenger, have just stepped into a war far older than you realize. Enemy or ally?" Eric's grip on his blaster tightened. He didn't trust anyone, especially not some strange alien hiding in a secret ruin in the middle of the desert. "You know who I am," Eric said cautiously, "but I don't know you, and I don't trust people I don't know." Kareth let out a low, growling chuckle. "Good. Trust gets people killed." The alien stepped closer, moving with the silent grace of a predator. But I am not your enemy. Not today. Eric narrowed his eyes. Then why are you here? Kareth's gaze flicked to the message device strapped to Eric's chest. Because of that. Eric's stomach twisted. So you want the message too? Kareth exhaled, shaking his head. No, I want to see it delivered. That caught Eric off guard. Why would an alien, one of the enemy's own people, help him? Before he could ask, a deafening explosion shook the chamber. Dust rained from the ceiling, and Eric knew. The hunter was coming through. Kareth turned toward the sound, his hand resting on the hilt of a curved blade strapped to his back. We don't have much time, human. You need me to survive. And I. His golden eyes glowed in the darkness. I need you to finish what I started. What do you mean? Eric asked. Kareth stepped closer. Because I was once like them. Eric's blood ran cold. Kareth had been one of the hunters. The betrayal. Kareth moved quickly, pulling Eric toward a side corridor, just as the outer wall collapsed. The hunter's massive form crashed through, its glowing eyes scanning the chamber. It had found them. Kareth didn't hesitate. With a single motion, he drew his blade and charge. The hunter's arm shifted into a spinning energy weapon, and the two clashed in a burst of sparks. Eric wasn't about to wait around. This was his chance. He sprinted toward the exit, his mind racing. He didn't know if he could trust Kareth. But right now, he had no choice. The only way out was forward. The corridor ahead led deeper into the ruins, twisting and turning through forgotten halls. Eric followed his wrist scanner, hoping it would lead him toward an exit. Then suddenly, a sharp pain exploded in his side. He stumbled, looking down. A small metallic dart was lodged in his suit. His vision blurred, his legs weakening. Then he heard Kareth's voice, distant and fading. They've poisoned you. Darkness swallowed Eric whole. The truth unfolds. When Eric opened his eyes, he was somewhere new. The air was thick with the scent of smoke and metal, and the distant hum of machinery filled his ears. He was no longer in the ruins. He was in an enemy war camp, and sitting across from him, bound in chains, was Kareth. The alien warrior met Eric's gaze and said two words that sent a chill through his soul. We've been betrayed. Betrayal in the sands. Pain throbbed through Eric's skull as he forced his eyes open. The air was heavy, filled with the scent of burning metal and sand. His limbs felt weak, his muscles refusing to move. Something was wrong. Slowly, his vision cleared. He wasn't in the ruins anymore. He was inside an enemy war camp. Thick, rusted metal walls surrounded him. Bright blue force fields flickered at the only exit. Outside, alien soldiers moved in patrols, their weapons gleaming under the dim desert sun. And then he saw Kareth. The alien warrior sat across from him, bound in heavy energy shackles, his armor scorched from battle. His golden eyes flickered with rage, but not at Eric. At whoever had captured them both. Eric tried to move, but a sharp pain stabbed through his side. His hand brushed against a small puncture wound in his suit. The dart. His head snapped toward Kareth. They poisoned me. Kareth exhaled slowly. Not poisoned. Drugged. To keep you weak. Eric clenched his jaw. Who sold us out? Kareth's eyes darkened. He leaned forward and spoke two words that sent a chill through Eric's chest. The Queen. The lies we believe. For a moment, Eric thought he had misheard. The Queen. His Queen. The one who sent him on this mission. His mind raced, searching for another explanation. But Kareth's gaze didn't waver. She's the reason we're here, human, Kareth said. Your queen knew you would be hunted. She knew you would be chased across the sands. And she knew exactly where you would end up. Eric's breath hitched. That doesn't make sense. Why would she betray her own messenger? Kareth tilted his head. Because she never expected you to succeed. The words sank like a blade into Eric's gut. Everything. The mission. The hunters. The ruins. It had all been a setup. Eric had been sent to die. A dangerous revelation. Kerith leaned back against the cold metal wall, his gaze locked on Eric. She sent you with a message, knowing the enemy would chase you. But you weren't just carrying words. You were carrying proof. Eric frowned. Proof of what? But something felt wrong. The journey into the unknown. The guards shoved them forward, leading them through the war camp. The sky above was a dull red, the sun setting behind massive dust clouds. The scent of burning fuel and rusted metal filled the air. They passed rows of enemy soldiers, hulking creatures in sleek black armor, their weapons trapped across their backs. Some watched them with amusement, others with hate. A few looked, uncertain. It confirmed what Kerith had said. Not all of them knew the truth. Not all of them wanted this war. They stopped near a large transport carrier, a massive armored vehicle meant for long desert treks. It hovered a few inches above the ground, its engines humming softly. The officer turned to them. You will be taken to a secure facility. There you will deliver your message. Eric narrowed his eyes. What facility? The officer's smirk never faded, one where the truth will be heard. Then he stepped aside as the guards pushed Eric and Kerith inside. The doors sealed shut behind them with a heavy metallic thud. And the moment they did, Kerith tensed. The warning. The interior of the transport was dark, filled with stacked supply crates and weapon racks. It was meant for moving troops, not prisoners. Eric frowned. Something's wrong. Kerith's jaw tightened. We're not being taken to any secure facility. Eric looked around. Then where? Kerith's golden eyes gleamed. To our execution. Eric's stomach dropped. Of course, the enemy had no reason to let him live. Not really. The moment they got what they wanted, they'd eliminate him. Or worse, they'd never plan to let him speak at all. The trap revealed. The transport rumbled to life, lifting off from the ground. Through a small slit in the metal, Eric could see they were moving fast. The desert stretched endlessly below them, a sea of sand and jagged cliffs. Kerith's hands flexed. We need to get out of here. Now. Eric scanned the room. No weapons. No visible exits. Then, his gaze locked onto something. A ventilation hatch near the roof, just large enough to squeeze through. Kerith followed his gaze and nodded. It leads to the engine bay. If we can sabotage the transport, we might have a chance. A chance. Eric had spent his whole life chasing chances that barely existed. What was one more? Cover me. Eric climbed onto the nearest crate and reached for the vent. His fingers barely touched the edges. Then a sharp lurch sent him flying backward. The transport was under attack. The ambush begins. A massive explosion erupted outside, rocking the transport violently. The walls shook as the engines whined under sudden pressure. Something had hit them. Kerith leaped to his feet. We're being shot down. Eric barely had time to react before the transport spun wildly, alarms blaring. The impact sent them both crashing into the walls. Outside, through the viewing slit, Eric saw black shadows moving across the desert sky. Attack ships. Someone had set a trap. But was it for Eric, or for the people holding him? The fall. The transport's pilot tried to maneuver, but the damage was too severe. The ship dropped lower and lower, plummeting toward the sands below. Brace yourself, Kerith roared. Eric barely had time to grab onto the metal railing before the impact hit. The world shattered into chaos. Metal twisted and screamed as the transport slammed into the desert floor, skidding across the sand before flipping onto its side. Flames burst from the broken engines. Smoke filled the air. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then, gunfire. Eric coughed, struggling to push himself up. Through the haze of smoke and dust, he saw figures approaching. Not enemy soldiers, not hunters, but humans, his people. And at their front, a woman clad in battle-worn armor, her face sharp with determination. Eric's breath caught in his throat. He knew her, Captain Mira Vasquez, his former commanding officer, and she was pointing a gun straight at him. The final betrayal. Mira stepped forward, her soldiers fanning out behind her. Some aimed their weapons at the surviving alien guards, finishing them off with ruthless efficiency. Others surrounded Eric and Kareth, their expressions unreadable. Eric pushed himself up, his heart racing. Mira. Her eyes were cold. Stand down, Solus. Kareth's hand hovered near his blade. You know her. Eric swallowed. I did. Mira's grip on her rifle tightened. You were supposed to be dead, Solus. The Queen sent me to clean up the mess. The truth hit Eric like a punch to the gut. His mission was never meant to succeed. And now, standing face to face with his own people, Eric had to make a choice. Surrender and die, or fight and survive. Kareth growled beside him. Choose wisely, human. Eric exhaled slowly. Then he reached for his weapon. The final sprint. The desert wind howled, carrying the scent of burning metal and death. The wreckage of the transport carrier lay in ruins, flames licking at its shattered hull. Bodies, both human and alien, were scattered across the sand, lifeless reminders of the trap Eric had walked into. But none of that mattered now, because Captain Mira Vasquez was pointing a gun at him. Her expression was unreadable, but the cold edge in her voice told Eric everything he needed to know. She wasn't here to rescue him. She was here to kill him. The weight of betrayal. For a moment, neither of them moved. Eric could hear the faint clicking of Mira's rifle as she adjusted her grip. Around them, her soldiers stood in a tight formation, weapons locked on both Eric and Kareth. Kareth, still bound by his restraints, remained perfectly still. But Eric could feel the tension radiating from the alien warrior. He was waiting for an opening. Mira took a slow step forward. Drop the weapon. Solus. Eric didn't move. You don't have to do this. Mira's jaw tightened. You should have been dead 2 weeks ago. The Queen gave you a chance to die a hero. You should have taken it. The words hit like a gut punch. So it was true. Everything Kareth had said. Everything Eric had suspected. The Queen had never expected him to survive. She had sent him to die. The message wasn't about peace. It was about control. A distraction to keep the enemy occupied while the war machine kept turning. And now Mira was here to erase the last loose end. A plan in motion. Eric exhaled slowly. He had seconds to decide. Surrender, and he died. Fight, and he might still die. But at least he'd die on his own terms. His fingers twitched near his belt, brushing against a small detonation charge he had swiped from the wreckage. Not powerful enough to kill anyone outright, but enough to create a distraction. Kareth, watching closely, gave the faintest nod. He had seen the movement. He was ready. Now it was up to Eric. Mira sighed, raising her weapon. Last chance, Solus. Eric smiled. You always were bad at giving me options. Then he threw the charge. The fight for survival. The explosion wasn't big, but it was enough. Sand and smoke erupted in all directions, blinding Mira's squad. Eric moved first, lunging sideways as plasma fire lit up the air. Mira's soldiers fired blindly, their shots tearing into the wreckage behind him. Kareth acted next. The alien warrior twisted his arms, snapping the restraints with brute strength. In a single motion, he seized a fallen soldier's weapon and fired. The battlefield erupted into chaos. Eric rolled behind a crate, firing his pistol toward the soldiers still recovering from the blast. 2 went down before they even knew what was happening. Mira cursed, dodging behind cover. Damn it. Solus. But Eric wasn't listening. He had one goal. Escape. Breaking the line. Kareth moved like a predator, weaving through the firefight with terrifying speed. His plasma rifle hummed as he tore through Mira's squad, taking down soldiers with deadly precision. Eric sprinted toward the edge of the battlefield, his mind racing. They needed an exit. A ship. anything. Then he saw it. A light skiff, a fast, two-person craft, parked near the wreckage. The kind of transport Mira's team would have used to get here. It was their only way out, if they could reach it. Mira's last stand. Eric was halfway to the skiff when Mira stepped into his path. Her rifle was aimed directly at his chest. "You're not leaving here, Solus." Eric skidded to a stop, his heart hammering. Mira's finger hovered over the trigger. She wouldn't miss. "Mira, listen to me. Asterisk, 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 this war isn't what you think. The Queen has been lying to us." Mira's expression didn't change. "I don't care." The words stopped Eric cold. Mira took a step forward, her voice steady. "We fight for the Queen. That's all that matters." Eric stared at her, realization sinking in. She wasn't just following orders. She believed. To her, the truth didn't matter. Loyalty did. And that meant she would never let him leave. Unless he forced her to. The final choice. Kerith appeared at Eric's side, weapon raised. "We don't have time for this, human." Mira's rifle didn't waver. Neither did Kerith's. And for the first time in his life, Eric realized he had to kill her. His friend. His former commanding officer. Or she would kill him. The silence stretched. Then Mira whispered, "I'm sorry, Solus." And she pulled the trigger. Eric moved. The escape. The shot grazed his shoulder, but Eric didn't stop. He lunged forward, grabbing Mira's rifle and twisting it away. Kerith fired once. The blast struck Mira in the leg, sending her crashing to the ground. Eric's breath hitched. She wasn't dead, but she was out of the fight. And that was all that mattered. He turned, sprinting for the skiff. Kerith was right behind him. The remaining soldiers fired wildly, but it was too late. Eric slammed into the pilot's seat, flipping the ignition. The skiff roared to life. Kerith leaped aboard, blasting the last of the enemy guards. Then they were airborne. The desert rushed beneath them, the war camp fading into the distance. They had escaped. For now. The truth on the horizon. Eric didn't speak for a long time. His hands clenched the controls, his mind racing. Everything had changed. He was no longer just a messenger. He was a traitor to the Queen. And the galaxy was about to find out why. Kerith sat beside him, watching the horizon. "What now, human?" Eric exhaled, staring ahead. "Now, we finish this." The Queen's decision. The desert stretched endlessly beneath the speeding skiff, its twin engines roaring against the winds. Eric Solus sat at the controls, his hands tight around the steering, his mind racing faster than the vehicle itself. Beside him, Kerith sat with a blaster across his lap, his golden eyes scanning the horizon. They had escaped. For now. But the war wasn't over. The message, the truth that could shatter the Queen's empire, was still in Eric's possession, and he was finally in a position to deliver it. But if he did, it meant war. Not the war he had been fighting his whole life. Not the war against an enemy he had been trained to hate. A war against his own people. The Queen's shadow. A blinking light on the skiff's control panel pulled Eric out of his thoughts. An incoming transmission. His stomach twisted. They had found him. Kerith shifted, readying his weapon. "It's her, isn't it?" Eric swallowed hard. There's only one way to find out. He tapped the screen, and the Queen's face appeared before him. Her hologram flickered against the skiff's dashboard, but even in the distortion, she looked as regal and as dangerous as ever. "Commander Solus," she said, her voice smooth and unreadable. "You disappoint me." The last offer. Eric's jaw tightened. He had served this woman for years. He had killed for her. He had risked everything to carry out her mission. And now he knew the truth. "You lied to me," he said, his voice steady. The Queen didn't flinch. "I did what was necessary." Eric exhaled, his fingers gripping the controls. How long? How long what? She asked, tilting her head slightly. How long have you known? Eric leaned forward, eyes blazing. How long have you known this war was built on a lie? For the first time, the Queen sighed. Since before you were born. The words landed like a hammer in Eric's chest. Kerith growled beside him, his hands tightening on his blaster. She never wanted peace. The Queen's gaze shifted to Kerith, studying him with a quiet intensity. You, of all creatures, should know the truth, alien. There is no peace, not between our species, not between any species. There is only control and survival. She looked back at Eric, and I am offering you a chance to survive. Eric's breath hitched. What are you talking about? The Queen's voice softened, almost gentle. Come home, Eric. This is your last chance. Destroy the message. Kill your friend. She glanced at Kerith with disdain. And I will welcome you back. Eric's blood ran cold. You expect me to betray him? The Queen's expression didn't change. I expect you to remember where you belong. A line in the sand. Silence stretched between them. Kerith said nothing, but Eric could feel his presence beside him, steady, waiting. This was it. The final choice. Go back. Accept the Queen's rule. Erase the truth. Live in comfort. Or move forward. Expose the lie. Spark a rebellion. And become the most wanted man in the galaxy. Eric closed his eyes. He had been a soldier his entire life, fighting for a cause he had never questioned. But now he wasn't a soldier. Now he was something else. He opened his eyes and met the Queen's gaze. I choose the truth. Then he cut the transmission. The final battle begins. The silence that followed was thick, heavy. Kerith let out a low breath. You know what happens now. Eric nodded. They'll come for us. And as if on cue, the skiff's warning alarms blared. Enemy ships inbound. Multiple. Fast. Kerith bared his teeth. They're not wasting time. Eric slammed the controls, pushing the skiff to full speed. The desert blurred beneath them as they raced toward their only chance, an old smuggler's station, abandoned years ago. If they could reach it, they could broadcast the message to the entire galaxy. If they couldn't, then this was where they died. The chase through fire. The enemy ships descended like predators. Eric weaved through the canyons, sand kicking up in violent waves behind them. Plasma bolts rained from above, scorching the ground just inches from their skiff. We can't outrun them forever, Kerith shouted. Eric didn't respond, because he wasn't trying to outrun them. He was leading them. To the smuggler's station. To the final fight. The truth unleashed. The station loomed ahead, half buried in the sand, its metal walls rusted with age. They were almost there. Eric slammed the controls, pushing the skiff to its limit. A plasma blast grazed their engine, sending them spinning out of control. They crashed. Hard. The world blurred as Eric tumbled forward, smashing into the controls. His head snapped back, stars exploding in his vision. When he opened his eyes, Kerith was already pulling him up. Move, human. Eric forced himself to stand, his legs screaming in protest. The enemy ships landed nearby, troops pouring out. They had seconds. Kerith covered him, firing into the advancing soldiers as Eric stumbled into the station. Inside, dust filled the air. The old broadcasting system was still intact. This was it. Eric jammed the message device into the console. The screen flickered to life. He hit the send button. And across the galaxy, the truth was unleashed. The Queen's reckoning. The Queen watched from her throne as the broadcast interrupted every channel. She listened to Eric Solis's voice as he exposed everything. The lies, the war, the deception. Her empire shook. Her people listened. And far beyond the palace, rebellion ignited like wildfire. The Queen closed her eyes, breathing deeply. Then she turned to her generals. Find him, and burn everything he touched to the ground. The beginning of the end. Back in the desert, Eric and Kareth fought for their lives. The Queen's forces were closing in, but they had done it. The truth was out. The galaxy would never be the same again. Kareth grinned through bloodied teeth. You know they'll never stop hunting us now. Eric smirked, wiping the dust from his face. Let them try. Then, together, they disappeared into the desert, ready for whatever came next.